Hi, enjoy listening. The house had 5 rooms and a crooked porch, paint flaking off its old white boards like ash from a tired fire. It sat at the edge of Lark Hollow, a place too small to show up on most maps, where the roads turned to dirt and the wind carried the scent of earth and pine. For generations, the Mallorys had worked that land, planting, digging, tending and repairing. But this morning, there was nothing left to tend. The last acre had been sold. The garden that once bloomed with tomatoes and zinnias lay still under a grey, cloud-heavy sky. Ethan Mallory stood with his hands in the pockets of a threadbare hoodie, watching as the buyers, strangers in a gleaming truck, loaded the final boxes into their vehicle. He tried not to look at the patch of ground where his mother used to sit on a lawn chair, shelling peas and humming softly. Behind him, the front door creaked. His mother, Carol, stepped onto the porch, wrapped in her worn winter coat, her cheeks pale and eyes shadow from weeks of chemo. "You ready?" she asked. Ethan nodded, swallowing hard. They didn't speak much during the bus ride into the city. Carol leaned against the window, drifting in and out of sleep. Ethan sat beside her, gripping the duffel bag that carried everything they still owned: 2 changes of clothes, her medications, and a photo of his grandmother in a cracked frame. By the time they arrived in Ashford, "It's not much," Carol said as she sat heavily on the bed. "But it's warm." Ethan forced a smile. "I'll make it work." Over the next few days, Ethan searched for work. He knocked on doors, filled out applications, and tried to smile through every rejection. Nobody wanted a kid barely out of high school, especially one without experience or connections. The only thing he had going for him was his strength and his silence. Meanwhile, Carol's health worsened. The city hospital agreed to continue her treatments under a reduced payment plan, but it still wasn't free. Ethan began skipping meals, pretending he wasn't hungry, using the last of their money for her prescriptions. He never told her when he went to sleep with an empty stomach. One night, after being turned down at a diner for the 3rd time, Ethan sat on the back steps of the boarding house and stared at the dark city skyline. Cars hummed below like a restless river. He pressed his palms together and whispered to the quiet air, "Please, I just need a chance. I'll work. I'll do anything." The next morning, he found a flyer posted outside a hardware store. Warehouse help needed. $7 an hour, apply in person. The address was on the industrial edge of the city. Ethan took the bus, walked 2 miles, and stood in front of a peeling grey building with loading docks and shouting foremen. Inside, the air smelt of oil, concrete, and tired men. The supervisor barely looked at him. "You strong?" "Yes, sir." "You drink?" "No, sir." "You complain?" "No." "You're hired." The work was brutal. Lifting, stacking, unloading pallets of tile and wood and industrial paint. The pay was a joke, but Ethan didn't flinch. He arrived early, stayed late, and took the shifts no one wanted. The other workers laughed, smoked during breaks, and made crude jokes about bosses and bills. Ethan didn't join them. He worked. On the fourth day, a sleek black SUV pulled up outside the loading dock. Ethan was halfway through moving a pallet of bathroom tile when he noticed a sharply dressed man step out. He wore a camel-colored coat and polished shoes, entirely out of place among forklifts and cement dust. The man stood, watching silently as the workers unloaded crates into the vehicle. The man's eyes followed Ethan, while the others leaned on carts or half-heartedly tossed supplies. Ethan knelt to reposition a fallen crate, realigned the stack, then carefully secured the load with a bungee cord. When the job was finished, the man approached him. "You always work like that?" he asked. Ethan hesitated. "Yes, sir." The man extended a hand. "Marcus Rayner. I manage an estate across town. My employer is looking for someone exactly like you." Ethan's heart skipped. "What kind of work?" he asked cautiously. "Groundskeeping, light maintenance, bit of yard care, bit of general help. Pays better than this. Comes with a place to stay and meals. We're selective, no nonsense types." "But I think you'll do just fine." Ethan didn't blink. "I'll take it." Marcus smiled. "Good. Be ready tomorrow morning. I'll pick you up at 9. As the SUV rolled away, Ethan turned his face toward the sky. The clouds had broken, and for the first time in weeks, a single shaft of sunlight warmed his face. Maybe, just maybe, his luck was changing. Ethan woke before dawn, his nerves humming like live wires. He'd laid out his only decent pair of jeans and a navy blue flannel shirt, washed and pressed the night before. He checked the time again. 8:47 a.m. He didn't want to seem eager, but he was already waiting outside the boarding house, duffel in hand, when Marcus Rayner's black SUV pulled up. Marcus stepped out in a clean dark jacket and aviator sunglasses. A wrought iron gate slid open as the SUV approached, revealing a sprawling mansion nestled beside a glittering lake. Wide lawns stretched across the property, blooming with landscaped flower beds, stone pathways, and marble fountains. An open-air pavilion overlooked a long rectangular pool, glimmering under the morning sun. The main house, 3 stories of whitewashed stone, tall windows and ivy-covered balconies, looked like something out of a magazine. Ethan swallowed hard. "You weren't kidding," Marcus smirked. "Most people say that. Come on, time to meet the boss." They walked past the pool and through a side garden, filled with rose trellises and low boxwood hedges. Birds chirped lazily, and somewhere nearby, a breeze rustled through the pines. Ethan caught a glimpse of a woman reclined on a chaise lounge by the pool. Mid-40s, perfectly styled hair, reading a magazine. She didn't glance up. "That's Mrs. Caldwell, Gloria. Don't worry, she pretends not to see anyone below her pay grade," Marcus muttered under his breath. They found Richard Caldwell seated beneath a pergola, coffee in hand, dressed in a pressed white shirt and slacks, going over papers with a silver-haired assistant. A large Labrador snoozed at his feet. "Morning, Mr. Caldwell," Marcus said respectfully. "This is the young man I mentioned, Ethan Mallory." Richard Caldwell looked up slowly. He was in his early 50s, clean-shaven, with steel grey eyes, a firm jawline, and a presence that seemed to fill the air. Ethan expected something colder, more distant. Instead, Richard studied him like a man trying to remember a name he once knew. "How old are you, Ethan?" he asked. 18, sir." "You've done landscaping before?" "Grew up on a farm. I can rake, mow, prune, dig, whatever you need." "You get along with people?" "Yes, sir." Richard tapped his fingers on the armrest. "I don't care for drama. I don't care for laziness. And I certainly don't tolerate theft. Clear?" "Yes, sir. Very clear." Richard leaned back and nodded. "All right. Marcus, show him the grounds. Get him settled in." The estate had its own guest house behind the main residence. 2 rooms, a kitchenette, and a view of the gardens. For Ethan, it felt like luxury. He dropped his duffel on the bed and stepped out into the bright morning, breathing in the scent of pine, grass, and rich earth. For the first time in a long time, the world felt wide again. By week's end, Ethan had already transformed parts of the back garden. He cleaned out tangled shrubs, trimmed dead trees, scrubbed the algae off the pool tiles, and repaired an old section of irrigation piping without being asked. Marcus was impressed. So was the rest of the staff, especially the cook, who made sure Ethan never missed a hot meal. "He's polite, that one," she told Marcus one afternoon. "Always thanks me. Always washes his own dishes." Even Mr. Caldwell had taken to stopping by the garden after his morning walk. "You've got a good eye," he said one day, admiring the new layout Ethan had planned for the fall flower beds. "Smart hands." Ethan shrugged. "Just how I was raised." But not everyone was pleased. One evening, while Ethan raked leaves near the main house, a black sports car screeched into the driveway. A tall young man in expensive sunglasses and designer sneakers stepped out, tossing his keys to the valet. Wesley Caldwell. Marcus, who had been talking with Ethan about a tool shed repair, muttered, "Brace yourself." Wesley walked past them, wrinkling his nose. "Who's the new landscaper? Thought we were hiring staff, not strays." Ethan straightened, but said nothing. Wesley smirked. "How's life out of the barn, kid?" Marcus cut in. Ethan nodded, jaw tight. He wouldn't give Wesley the satisfaction. Let the rich kid bark. He'd built more fences and chopped more wood before age 16 than that boy ever had in his life. That night, Ethan video called his mum from his room. Her face lit up when she saw him. "You look good," she said. "Are they treating you well?" "It's beautiful here," he replied. careful not to sound like he was bragging. "Works hard, but it's honest, and they feed me." Carol chuckled. "You always worked better when you had a full stomach." Ethan's smile faded slightly. "How are the treatments?" She hesitated. "Tiring, but I'm holding on. I'll send money this week." "I know, sweetheart. I don't need to ask." As they said goodnight, Ethan stared out the window at the lake, moonlight silvering its still surface. His fingers drummed absently on the windowsill. Something about this place, the people, the tension, the odd way Richard Caldwell looked at him, left a question mark in his gut. He didn't know yet how much of his past was buried in this garden, but he was about to find out. By the middle of October, the Caldwell estate was a picture of autumn perfection. Burnt orange leaves, trimmed hedges, and a crispness in the air that made everything feel a little more alive. Ethan had been working there for over a month now. His hands were permanently calloused, and he knew every inch of the grounds by heart, from the hydrangeas near the lake to the ivy that climbed up the stone arches. He felt useful, needed, but not entirely welcome. Though most of the staff liked him, there was one presence that turned every day into a quiet test: Wesley Caldwell. Wesley had returned home for a short break from his university, a flashy campus just outside the city where tuition alone could buy a small house. Whenever he wasn't racing off in his sports car or lounging around the pool with his phone, he found time to needle Ethan. Never overtly, just small, carefully calculated jabs. "You missed a spot," he said one morning, stepping onto the patio in his loafers while Ethan swept the flagstone. Ethan looked up, brow furrowed. "That corner," Wesley pointed lazily. "Leaves. This is supposed to be a luxury home, not a barnyard." Ethan nodded silently and turned to finish the task. But Wesley didn't leave. "You know," he continued, sipping a cold brew coffee from a glass bottle, "I've been thinking. It's sort of cute. My dad bringing in a little charity case to work in the garden. Maybe it makes him feel noble, important." Ethan didn't take the bait. He had learned silence was stronger than anger. Wesley frowned. "Nothing to say?" "Nope." Wesley smirked. "That's fine. Stay in your lane, Mallory." And with that, he turned and walked away. Satisfied, like a child who had poked a caged animal and watched it flinch. The next afternoon, Ethan was pruning the rose garden behind the west wing. It was his favourite place on the estate, tucked between tall stone walls, bursting with crimson, ivory, and apricot-coloured blooms. The air was sweet, and the world, for a few minutes, was quiet. He was focused, trimming gently when Wesley reappeared, this time in a blazer, slacks, and a smirk even wider than usual. "Careful with those," he said, nodding to the shears in Ethan's hands. "Wouldn't want you to hurt yourself, or the flowers. You know how much those cost." Ethan looked up calmly. "A lot less than your shoes, probably." Wesley blinked. "Did you just make a joke?" Ethan gave him the faintest hint of a smile. "Just an observation." That caught Wesley off guard. He opened his mouth, closed it, then scoffed and walked away. That night, Richard Caldwell joined Ethan by the garden bench near the pool. It had become a strange routine. Brief evening conversations over coffee or tea. The kind that danced around personal details, but revealed more than either man intended. "Those roses are looking better than they have in years," Richard said, sipping from a ceramic mug. "Thank you, sir. You've got a good eye for symmetry. You ever study design?" Ethan shook his head. "Didn't really have the chance. Spent most of my time helping on the farm or working odd jobs. I wanted to, though." Richard nodded slowly, his eyes thoughtful. "Where's your father?" Ethan paused. "Never knew him. Just me and my mum." Richard nodded again, slower this time. He didn't speak for a long moment, then said, "She must be proud of you." Ethan glanced down. "She is, I think. I just want to take care of her." There was something in Richard's eyes then, something heavy and unspoken. Regret, maybe, or recognition. "I admire that," Richard said at last. "Don't let people like Wesley get under your skin. He didn't grow up with much resistance." Ethan didn't respond. He didn't need to. The tension came to a boil one humid Friday afternoon. Ethan was working in the tool shed, organizing the rusted shelves and oiling equipment. He had his earbuds in, classical music, soft and grounding, when the door swung open hard and slammed against the wall. "Wesley, you think you're clever?" he snapped. Ethan pulled out his earbuds. "What?" "My dad. He talks about you like you're some kind of genius gardener. Like you're smarter than I am." Wesley's voice cracked slightly. "You think I don't see what's happening?" Ethan stepped back, puzzled. "Wesley, I'm just doing my job." "You're replacing me!" Wesley shouted. "In his eyes, anyway." Ethan said nothing. He was stunned by the bitterness in the other boy's voice. For the first time, Wesley didn't seem arrogant. He seemed scared. But then Wesley's face twisted into anger again. "You don't belong here!" And before Ethan could reply, Wesley grabbed the pruning shears and hurled them across the shed. They clattered against the wall, narrowly missing Ethan's arm. Ethan stepped forward calmly. "Are you done?" Wesley's chest heaved. "Stay out of my family!" Then he stormed out, leaving Ethan alone with the echo of his fury. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Ethan stood by the rose garden once more. He ran his hand over a freshly trimmed stem and exhaled slowly. He didn't belong here, at least not the way Wesley did. But he had earned every minute, every dollar, every flower, and no spoiled boy with designer shoes was going to take that away from him. He'd returned to his university in the city without saying goodbye. No note, no call, just vanished like a shadow retreating into the corner of a well-lit room. Ethan wasn't sure whether to feel relief or worry. Wesley might have left the estate, but the bitterness in his voice still echoed in Ethan's mind. For the first time since he'd arrived, Ethan allowed himself to breathe a little easier. The rose garden was quiet again. The orchard rose neat. Richard Caldwell more relaxed, even warm. And for 2 solid weeks, things felt good. Until they weren't. It started small. First, a missing pair of gardening gloves. Then a dent in the riding mower Ethan knew he hadn't caused. A few broken clay pots left behind the greenhouse. It didn't raise suspicion, just inconvenience. But something in the air had shifted, like the calm before a storm. Then came the theft. Ethan was walking to the shed one overcast afternoon when Richard approached him, flanked by 2 local officers in navy uniforms. "Ethan," Richard said quietly, his face unreadable. "We need to talk." Ethan stopped in his tracks. "What's wrong?" One of the officers, Officer Quinn, stepped forward, clipboard in hand. "There's been a report filed. Some items have gone missing from the Caldwell estate. Jewelry, a tablet, a watch. Estimated value is over $6,000. Ethan's jaw tightened. "And you think I took them?" Richard didn't meet his eyes. "Your name came up." Ethan's voice dropped. "From who?" Before either officer could answer, the second one, Officer Dale, said, "Mind if we search your room?" Ethan's mind raced. He had nothing to hide, but that didn't mean he felt safe. He thought of his mother, his promises, his record clean as the mountain air back home. "Go ahead," he said, stiffly. "I've got nothing to hide." They searched the small guest house Ethan lived in, behind the tool shed. It was barely more than a converted pool house. Bed, desk, kitchenette. Nothing fancy. At first, everything seemed fine. Then Officer Dale opened the bottom drawer of Ethan's nightstand. "There," he said, pulling out a velvet case. Inside, a delicate diamond bracelet. Ethan stepped back, stunned. "That's not mine!" Quinn opened the closet door. Tucked in a shoe was a gold watch. Richard stared at it like it had stabbed him. "No," Ethan said again, voice shaking. "I swear to you, I've never seen those." Dale raised an eyebrow. "You're the only one with access to this space." "I didn't!" Ethan's mouth went dry. "Someone planted it." The officers exchanged a look. Richard finally spoke, softly. "I need you to leave the property, Ethan, for now." "Sir, please," Ethan pleaded. "You know I wouldn't do this." "I thought I knew," Richard said with a grim sigh. And with that, the trust between them snapped like an overwatered stem. Ethan walked out of the estate that night with just a duffel bag and the clothes on his back. No job, no defense, and a cloud of suspicion clinging to him like the coming rain. He didn't call his mother. He couldn't, not yet. Instead, he walked into town and sat on the bench by the hardware store, staring at the gravel lot. His hands still smelled faintly of rosemary and soil. For the first time in months, he felt small again. Just like the day he left the village. Just like the day no one believed him the first time. Ethan spent that night in the back corner of the town's 24-hour laundromat. The machines hummed like tired hearts, and the vending machine buzzed louder than it should have. He tried to sleep with his duffel under his head, but the fluorescent light overhead refused to shut off. Around 3 a.m., he gave up. By morning, he was sore, hungry, and numb. With no money, no job, and no clue how to prove his innocence, Ethan wandered. He passed the bakery he used to stop at on Saturdays, but couldn't bear to go in. He cut through the park where he once trimmed hedges and waved to joggers, but now no one met his eye. Eventually, he ended up at the public library, mostly because it was warm and quiet. He hadn't been there in months. The librarian, a grey-haired woman named June, gave him a soft nod but didn't ask questions. She'd seen enough in her time to know when not to pry. Ethan tucked himself into a corner near the non-fiction section, laid his head on the table, and tried to disappear. That's when he heard the voice. "Excuse me, are you Ethan Mallory?" Ethan looked up slowly. A woman stood before him, early 30s maybe, tall, sharp-shouldered, but kind-eyed. She wore a navy blazer and held a slim leather notebook under one arm. He blinked. "Yeah." She stepped forward and offered a card. "My name is Mira Halston. I'm a freelance investigative journalist." Ethan sat up, wary. "Journalist?" She smiled faintly. "Relax. I'm not here to make a story out of you, but I know a setup when I see one." Ethan hesitated. "How do you even know my name?" Mira took the seat across from him. "Let's just say I've been looking into the Caldwells for a while. Not Richard, specifically, but Wesley." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "You're not the first person he's tried to humiliate," Mira said. "You might be the first he's actually framed." The next 2 hours passed in a blur. Mira showed him screenshots, old social media posts, anonymous tips she'd received, even a few leaked campus complaints. Wesley Caldwell had a pattern: petty cruelty, gaslighting, using his father's name to silence others. None of it stuck legally, but it painted a very clear picture. "He's careful," Mira said, "but not as clever as he thinks." Ethan leaned back. "Why are you helping me?" "Because I hate bullies," she said simply. "And because someone has to tell the truth when the town won't." She paused, then added, "Also, I know what it feels like to be blamed for something you didn't do." Ethan nodded, the weight in his chest easing slightly. "I can't promise anything yet," Mira said. "But if you're willing to help me dig, I think we can prove what really happened." Ethan exhaled. For the first time since he'd been thrown off the estate, he felt something close to hope. "I'm in." That night, Ethan didn't sleep in the laundromat. Mira booked him a few nights at a cheap motel on the edge of town. Nothing fancy, just a bed and a shower. She told him it was paid for by a small grant she received for long-form journalism on community corruption. "Think of it like an investment," she said. Ethan sat on the motel bed, staring out the window. The trees rustled under the glow of street lamps, and cars passed by slowly, oblivious to the fact that his life was quietly restarting. It wasn't over. Not yet. He had one shot to clear his name, and this time, he wasn't alone. Ethan stood in front of the Caldwell estate from the opposite side of the road, hidden behind a line of pine trees. The house looked just as it had the day he left. Grand, silent, smug. Except now he saw it differently. Not as a symbol of opportunity, but as a fortress guarding a lie. Beside him, Mira scanned the property through binoculars. Security's light, just one camera over the east shed and another above the garage, probably motion activated. This feels illegal, Ethan muttered. Mira smirked. Illegal is planting stolen items in someone's room to ruin their life. This is research. He wasn't sure if that comforted him. Back at her apartment, small, sun-filled, and packed with books, Mira laid out a plan. Over the next few days, they would track Wesley's whereabouts, follow up on a tip from one of Mira's anonymous sources, and search for any digital trail that might prove he'd framed Ethan. They started with Wesley's social media. He deleted most of his old posts, Mira said, scrolling through her laptop. But his likes are public. Look at this. Wesley had recently liked a post on a private security forum. The post described methods for covering one's tracks when planting evidence. It was obscure and technical, something most people wouldn't stumble across by accident. He's researching how to fake a theft, Ethan said. Mira nodded, and bragging without realizing it. The next lead came from someone Ethan never expected, Jordan, one of the younger gardeners at the Caldwell estate. He was quiet, barely said a word when they worked together. But Mira found him through a comment he'd left on a community bulletin post about unjust firings. They met him behind the town's high school gym. "I shouldn't be talking to you," Jordan said nervously, glancing around. "We just want the truth," Ethan told him. Jordan hesitated, then exhaled sharply. "A week before the theft, Wesley asked me where you kept your spare keys. I thought he was joking. He said he lost something in your place and didn't want to wake you." Ethan felt cold. "I didn't tell him," Jordan added quickly. "But the next day, I found the side window of your guest house cracked open." "That's enough to raise doubt," Mira said, voice calm but tense. "Enough to ask for a second investigation." Jordan looked guilty. "I should have said something sooner." Ethan shook his head. "You just did. Thank you." Back at Mira's place, they compiled everything. Screenshots, statements, timelines. It wasn't concrete proof yet, but it was the skeleton of the truth. The framework. And then Mira said something that stopped Ethan cold. "By the way," she said, flipping through a folder, "did you know your last name, Mallory, shows up in the Caldwell archives?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "There's a donation record, almost 15 years ago. Richard Caldwell gave a small inheritance to a woman named June Mallory." Ethan's mouth went dry. My mother. Mira looked up slowly. Do you think there's any chance you're related to them? Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. I don't know, he whispered. I never knew my father. Mum never talked about him. Mira closed the folder, eyes searching his face. Maybe this goes deeper than just a setup. Ethan turned to the window, watching the sunset paint the sky in streaks of orange and ash. All his life, he thought he was just the help. But now, Mira slid a photocopy across to him. That's the original deed to the Caldwell orchard, from 1971. But look at the notation in the margin. Ethan squinted. Co-owner, J. Mallory. She was a legal co-owner, Mira said. Your mother, or maybe her father, had a claim. Ethan's chest tightened. So you're saying the Caldwells might have bought her out, or forced her out? Maybe. Or maybe they just buried her name. Either way, they didn't want it to be remembered. The next stop was the courthouse basement, where Mira had access to older, unscanned property records and probate files. It was stuffy and smelled of mildew, but after an hour of digging through yellowing folders, they found what they were looking for. A letter, typed, dated 1992, from Richard Caldwell's attorney to a woman named June Mallory. A formal agreement to cease all further contact with the Caldwell estate in exchange for a financial settlement. Ethan stared at it, stunned. She never told me about any of this. She was probably protecting you, Mira said. But you have a legal link to that land, maybe even a right to part of it. Ethan rubbed his face. This doesn't feel real. It is, she said, and this changes everything. That evening, Mira arranged a meeting with a local civil rights attorney, Camille Devane, who worked pro bono in cases of wrongful termination and defamation. I've seen a lot of small-town cover-ups, Camille said, flipping through the folder Mira handed her. But this one's slick. The Caldwells didn't just frame you. They erased your roots. Ethan sat silently across the table, emotions tangled in his chest. Rage, confusion, disbelief. Camille continued. You're not just a former employee with a defamation case. You're possibly an heir with a land claim. That gives you leverage, and we can use that to expose what they did to you. Can we take this public? Ethan asked. Eventually, Camille said. But not yet. We need one more thing. What's that? Wesley's confession, or a recording that proves his intent. The idea seemed impossible, until Mira remembered something. Wesley always hangs out at the Gable, she said. That upscale bar near the golf course. He drinks too much, rums his mouth. If he thinks you're gone and out of the picture... Ethan nodded slowly. He might brag. Mira gave him a cautious look. You sure you want to go through with this? It means facing him. Ethan stared at his reflection in her apartment window. For the first time in weeks, he saw not a failure or a thief, but a man rising from the ashes of lies. I'm ready. They spent the next 2 days preparing. Mira borrowed a button-sized microphone from a friend who worked tech support at the local college. Ethan practiced small talk, ran through scripts, even cleaned up with a borrowed jacket to blend in at the gable. By Saturday night, Ethan walked into the bar alone, nerves buzzing under his skin like static. He spotted Wesley at a corner booth, surrounded by two frat-type friends and a girl laughing too hard at a story he was telling. Ethan waited, nursed a soda, and timed his approach carefully. Eventually, he accidentally bumped into Wesley at the bar. Wesley blinked, surprised. "You?" Ethan played it cool. "Just passing through. Heard the place was good." Wesley snorted. "Didn't think you could afford it. What, someone give you a pity scholarship?" Ethan chuckled. "I've had worse luck." Wesley smirked. "Yeah, well, should have stayed out of my way. The trap was set." Ethan leaned in. "So, what really happened, man? Did you actually find all that stuff in my room? Or was that just convenient?" Wesley rolled his eyes, swigged his drink, and muttered under his breath, "If you knew how easy it was to screw you over, you'd hate yourself even more." Ethan froze. The mic caught every word. 10 minutes later, Ethan walked briskly to Mira's parked car. His heart pounded. But his hand held the tiny flash drive that might change everything. He opened the door and exhaled. "It's done." Mira looked at him, wide-eyed. "Let's burn them down." The courtroom was small, just 3 rows of wooden benches and a tired judge who looked like he'd seen too many small-town scandals in his time. But for Ethan, this room was everything. A place where the lies that broke his life would finally face the truth. Camille Devane stood at the front, polished and calm, with Ethan beside her in a pressed shirt and borrowed blazer. Across the aisle sat Richard Caldwell, arms crossed, and Wesley, too relaxed for a man facing public exposure. The judge looked up over his glasses. "Let's begin." Camille presented the case clearly. Ethan Mallory, a loyal groundskeeper at the Caldwell estate, was wrongfully terminated and publicly defamed based on fabricated evidence. She outlined Wesley's online activity, the testimonies of witnesses like Jordan, and, most importantly, introduced the audio file. The moment the recording played, the entire room fell still. If you knew how easy it was to screw you over, you'd hate yourself even more. Ethan didn't look at Wesley. He didn't need to. The silence in the room said enough. The judge blinked. "Did Mr. Caldwell Jr. say this willingly?" "Unprompted," Camille said. "We have 2 backups of the original recording, verified by an expert. No editing, no manipulation." The defense attorney, hired by Richard Caldwell, tried to object, but the judge overruled him twice. Then came the twist Camille had saved for last. She walked to the middle of the courtroom and held up the notarized property documents. "My client, Ethan Mallory, is not just a wrongfully terminated employee. He is the biological son of June Mallory, who previously held co-ownership rights to a portion of the Caldwell estate. Records show a settlement was issued to silence her claim in 1992. We believe Ethan's connection was discovered and suppressed by the Caldwell family. A stunned murmur rippled through the audience. Even the judge leaned forward. Richard Caldwell's expression darkened. Wesley looked genuinely confused. Camille continued, "We are not asking for money. We are asking for justice. A clearing of Mr. Mallory's name, public acknowledgement of wrongdoing, and a formal investigation into the Caldwell estate's use of non-disclosure agreements to hide historical ties." The judge called a recess. Outside the courthouse, reporters who hadn't cared before now scrambled to ask questions. Ethan stood on the courthouse steps with Mira beside him. The sky was overcast, and for a moment it felt like the clouds were finally starting to break. He looked at Mira. "What happens now?" She smiled. "You're not invisible anymore, Ethan." A week later, the court ruled in Ethan's favor. Wesley Caldwell was ordered to pay damages for defamation and wrongful accusation. The Caldwell estate was subpoenaed for further investigation into their historical land acquisitions and settlement dealings. And most importantly, Ethan's name was cleared. Publicly, legally, and irrevocably. The local news ran the headline, "From suspect to heir, Ethan Mallory's redemption story." Ethan didn't care about the cameras. He cared about the quiet, the peace he felt for the first time in years. One morning, back in the orchard, Ethan stood at the tree line where he used to prune in silence, the place he once called home and prison at the same time. Mira walked up behind him. "You're really gonna do it?" He nodded. Camille found a way to claim a small piece of the original orchard. "I'm going to turn it into a retreat for kids like me. Kids who've been blamed, discarded, or forgotten." Mira looked proud. "That's beautiful, Ethan." He looked at her, the wind in her hair, sunlight dancing through the leaves. "It's just the beginning." It took nearly a year to clear the legal weeds and rewrite the story of his life. But Ethan Mallory had never known peace like this. The orchard he now owned, a modest 12-acre stretch on the eastern edge of the original Caldwell estate, looked almost the same as when he'd worked it as a silent, unnoticed labourer. The same crooked trees, the same rusted water barrels. But now every step he took on this land felt different. It felt like freedom. Mira stood by the wooden gate, her camera slung over her shoulder, snapping photos for the new non-profit website. A carved sign above the gate read, "The Mallory Orchard Project, a safe place to grow." Kids from group homes came on weekends. Local teenagers helped paint sheds, plant vegetables, and even learn to prune. What began as Ethan's dream to honour his mother had become a mission. On one sunny Saturday, a boy named Jalen, a quiet 13-year-old from a nearby foster group, stood beside Ethan, holding pruning shears like they were made of glass. "I'm scared I'll break it," Jalen muttered, eyeing the branch. Ethan knelt beside him. "It's okay to cut what doesn't help the tree grow. That's how it gets stronger." The boy looked at him. "That true for people too?" Ethan smiled, especially for people. That evening, Ethan and Mira sat on the porch of the small cabin they'd renovated together. Lantern light flickered between them, the orchard behind them glowing gold in the dusk. "You know," Mira said, "if you ever wanted to expand, we could get a grant." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Are you ever not working?" She laughed and leaned back, her hand brushing his. "Only when I'm sitting next to you." There were no more stolen moments now, no more secrets. What had once been broken was blooming again, slowly, deliberately. A few weeks later, the town held its fall harvest fair. Ethan was invited to speak, not just as the guy who beat a false accusation, but as someone who built something good from the ashes of betrayal. He stood under the bandstand, microphone in hand, heart steady. "I used to believe I had no roots, that I was just drifting from job to job, place to place, trying not to be seen. But the truth is, roots don't just come from blood or land. They come from people who believe in you, who remind you." If you like the story, I would be very happy to have your support. Click the thumbs up. And to not miss new stories, subscribe and click on the bell. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, and all the best.